Located at 184 Mohawk Street, the Woodland Cultural Centre serves to preserve and promote Indigenous history, art, culture, and language through innovative exhibitions and programs. I've invited Janis Monture, the Executive Director of the Woodland Cultural Centre, to tell us more. Janis, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, no, Goa. Thanks for having us.
So we'll dive right in. Tell us all about the Woodland Cultural Centre.
Well, sort of the brief overview of Woodland is that we were established in October of 1972 upon the closure of the former Mohawk Institute Residential School. So at that time, we went straight into preserving, presenting, promoting our Haudenosaunee languages, our culture, the artwork, and everything that sort of we were sort of not allowed to practice during the time the school was open. And since then, we've changed and evolved over the last 48 years, and we now are still going today in the same space, although some renovations have taken place. And we are supported by 3 First Nations communities. So many people assume that we're just associated with 6 Nations of the Grand River, which we are. But we also serve Wata Mohawks, who are located near Bala, Ontario, and Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte near Tyendinaga. So since opening Woodland, we continue to do a lot of great work in language, culture, art, as well as our museum, which has over 35,000 artifacts in our collection. And it's one of the largest facilities in Canada that's managed and administered by Indigenous administration. So we're always hoping to link our visitors to the past as well as to the present with our art galleries, and we celebrate Indigenous achievement in classical and contemporary art. So we have several in-house and traveling exhibitions that we feature annually, although albeit a little different this current year, which will look at an intimate look at Indigenous history and culture.
That's such an incredible center. I want to touch on that then, the actual cultural center aspect of it. So I picked out 3 parts there. So can you tell me a little bit about the museum specifically and the exhibits you have?
Yeah, so the museum is told on a timeline, storyline, if you can say. It starts off, you enter into what would be a diorama of what would be typically a neutral village at that time. And you would see the characteristics of that village, you know, the long houses depicted, surrounded by a huge palisade wall, and you would see people doing everyday things. So the men coming in from hunting, an older woman preparing the pots to cook the feast that they are bringing to the people, a boy playing a game, and then when the women also helping in the gardens. And you see all of that in the first diorama, and it's very similar to how our Haudenosaunee people would have lived at that time. And from there, we then sort of move along and we enter sort of the 1600s and the sort of the newcomers of the time coming in, Jesuit priests from France. Takes you along, and it sort of takes you along the story of how our people came to this area. So in 1784, although what is now considered Brantford Six Nations would have been our traditional beaver hunting grounds, we ended up formally moving here as part of the Haldeman Treaty in 1784. And that's depicted in the museum with the original plot of land that we were given on 6 miles on either side of the Grand River, and talks about how over the years, a lot of those plots of land were either squatted on or sold without our authority, just taken. And even the trust funds that we were using for some of those sales, we were leasing out. We had our 99-year leases. And even the trust fund money that we had was being dipped into by the Indian agents and the government at the time. So we talk a little bit about that history as well. And it takes you right into the era of what would have been the residential school opening in 1828 in the original Mohawk village when Joseph Brant and his followers came here. And then as soon as you end out of the residential school era, we sort of walk you through what a modern day longhouse today at Six Nations or any Haudenosaunee community looks like. And you sort of get brought back up to the 20th century and you see the achievements of E. Pauline Johnson, Tom Longboat, the impacts of World War I and World War II in our communities. You look at the rise of entrepreneurship, men going out of their communities to make a livelihood through ironworking. And they sort of come down and end with looking at the stereotypes imposed on our people and how these misconceptions have really guided the narrative of Indigenous people in Canada today, specifically those at Six Nations. And we try to end in the last sort of bit of the museum celebrating the achievements of our people. So whether it be in music, theater, sport, such as lacrosse, of course, which is our creators game. And then you would enter into what would then become the temporary art galleries, or temporary galleries, we should say, for the changing exhibitions we change out every year.
So beyond the different exhibits and events that would happen at the Woodland Cultural Centre, that's a permanent exhibit at the
Exactly.
museum.
Yeah,
And you're telling a story that absolutely must be told and must be seen. People should come and learn the history of where we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important. I think it gives a background into understanding a little bit about how, our relationships changed over time with, the newcomers, and then building relationships with those who lived around us as our neighbors, and then how those relationships continued to this day.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome.
The second bit that I pulled out was about the art exhibits. So
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? I know that I've been there for several different art shows now, and it's traditionally a display of incredible Indigenous works. And how often does that change out? And tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so on an annual, we usually see about 3 new exhibitions presented in a given year, some longer than others, of course, depending on the scale and scope of the exhibition. But so usually we change it out 3 times a year. And we have 3 galleries. So sometimes the smallest gallery more is like for community grassroots organizations. So that might be a different thematic versus the main 2 galleries where the larger exhibition would be shown. And the exhibitions are curated by our art history curator, Patricia Dedman. And she puts together a 3 to 5 year programming plan. So sometimes we borrow exhibitions from other like institutions, and other time we curate them in-house. And sometimes there's sort of a longer research-based period where it takes a few years to create those exhibitions. So Patricia's fairly new to the center. She's been there since last August. And so she's now bringing her new sort of voice to that space, which is fantastic. Anyone who knows Patricia would know she's a long history in Indigenous arts and is a practicing artist herself. So we're very excited to have her on board.
One of my favorite parts was to not only get to admire the art when I visit, but getting to meet the artists and hear the stories and to learn more about the creation of the art. That's powerful stuff. And I remember every experience that I've had there so far. So segueing into my next question is about the third part that you talked about, and that's programming and projects. So could you tell us a little bit about the programming at the Woodland Cultural Centre and some of the projects that you're working on right now?
Well, it's a little different world, as we know, in COVID-19. So we are really having to, it seems, make changes on the daily in regards to how we move forward with our programming. So what the team has done and has done it quite well since we closed to the public in March is move some of our programming online. So we've done some educational resource programming, such as corncob beaded keychain workshops, where we invited participants to join us via Zoom, and we taught them how to make these beaded corncobs. We also did some virtual author readings. So we did one with Jordan Wheeler not that long ago about children's books. So we really wanted to ensure that we were helping some of those stay-at-home parents connect and learn about Indigenous authors who are writing for children's books. And that's really great work. We also worked with some visual artists who graciously donated their artwork to be put into a virtual coloring book. So people were able to sign up, get the link, download the coloring book, and spend time with their children and adults alike coloring these amazing Indigenous artists' works. And has gone over as been one of the most successful pieces we've done. And for, I believe it was National Canadian Film Day in April, we did a virtual film screening of The Grizzlies as part of that national initiative. So we were very happy to participate. And then in last month, actually, there was the first sort of Indigenous online music festival, Takaranto, and we helped by sponsoring one of the artists as part of that larger festival that ran for 3 days, which was fantastic to see that many Indigenous artists on your screen, staying at home, listening to some great and some very new music, which was very exciting. So for us, we are continuing to try to adapt to this online environment. So the next big thing for us will be June 21st for National Indigenous Peoples Day. We are going to be doing another virtual film screening of 6 Miles Deep. So this is regarding, of course, many will know the protest that happened in Caledonia about 15 years ago. And we're very fortunate that we're going to be having the filmmaker, artist Sarah Rock, as well, going to introduce the film and then take a Q&A following the film. But a lot of, some of the other programming a lot of people are used to that are held annually, like the smoke dance competition, unfortunately, has had to been canceled. And we had to postpone our annual Indigenous art exhibition, which is a juried art show. That has been postponed. We're seeing if we can still have it, if restrictions are lifted in end of September. But if not, that may have to be canceled or moved to an online format. Because we then are now starting to backlog a bunch of our exhibitions for the, we've lost, what would have shown, April, May, June. We're now going to probably lose July, August, and September. So that's where we're starting to see, like, what can we postpone, what can we cancel? And right before COVID, we had the Quilted Belonging exhibition up. And so there was some really great programming that was attached to that show. So they have done some of it online, but it is, it's unfortunate because it's a really fantastic exhibition. So we had the art opening, and then 2 weeks later, everything closed. So that was disappointing. So we're hoping, fingers crossed, we might be able to partially reopen in a very phased in approach that maybe more people will be able to see it. But yeah, it's been a tricky year.
So you've actually answered what was going to be my next question. And I just want to say that I've been doing a lot of these interviews lately, and for those who have been watching, it's really amazing to see how innovative you're able to be, and how, even though we are facing this worldwide crisis that has impacted organizations like yours tremendously, you've kept going, and you've kept providing the service and the quality of service that you've promised to the community. And you've got these really great projects still happening, and you are preparing obviously to open to the public. But just because you're not open to the public, the work hasn't stopped. Your commitment to so then, instead of me specifically asking you how things have changed regarding the COVID-19 crisis and what you're doing, because you answered that very well, talk to me a little bit about your team and the employees that are there. I mean, I'm sure this has impacted you with the COVID-19 crisis. So are many of them still working from home, or is there a lot of stuff happening on site? What are they working on right now?
So I guess in a way it gives us that time to sort of step back and do things that, aren't necessarily the fun things or fun pieces of our job that we love doing, interacting with the public, working in collaborations with artists, doing partnerships with other stakeholders and other programming institutions. Sort of all that has sort of subsided. So it's given us a lot of time to sort of, well, let's review some of our plans for the year. Let's review policies, all these things that, you have to do every year, and you kind of put it on the back burner because you're so overwhelmed with, meetings or, programming or, public interface. It has given us a lot of time to sort of step back, visit our programming plan, look at our plan for going forward. Also, how do we shift our plans at this time? The employees are working remotely. Some of them have been able to come in and out, because obviously they took things home thinking it was going to be a 2-week shut down and has now turned into a 3-month shutdown. So there are things that they've had to come back into the office safely, of course, to grab more work, to grab more research. So that's been like the sort of the one side of it, is that it gives us a lot of time to sort of plan and really focus, take a step back. Was what we were doing, was it relevant? And this, I think, has really shown us that you have to be able to pivot on a moment's notice. So the team has been really good at that, to meet some of the needs and, not disappoint, some of our clients and our public. Is we're taking virtual tours now of the residential school, which we will now be providing online to the various tour groups who were impacted upon our closure, but also for many of those who want to still learn about the history of the residential school. So we just finalized all of that paperwork in literally the last day. So we had our first Zoom virtual tour of the residential school last night, and apparently it went off without a hitch, so I'm very happy. But these are things, the team are very good at sort of, okay, well, what can we do? How do we still do our jobs, but in this new interface? And, we still meet weekly. The teams meet separately. They still meet weekly. And we all sort of just do our job, but just a little bit different. And yeah, I'm excited, but it was very weird to start back because I've just been recently appointed. So my first day on the job was from home, which was very weird, and not weird to meet everyone and get to know them. I have to do it via Zoom, so it's been an interesting transition. But I think the team for itself, they are doing with what they have available and are doing quite great things. So I'm very excited.
So the Woodland Cultural Center is going to come out of this maybe a bit different, but definitely a stronger organization.
Yeah, I think most organizations are going to come out of this a bit different. I think how we interact with one another is still going to be quite cautious. Moving forward, we still have to practice social distancing even within the workplace once some of the restrictions are lifted and once we're ready and the board of directors feels like we're ready to be open. But there are going to be a lot of changes, and I think this has really made a lot of, I think, leaders in the community sort of step back and go, wow, okay, so what can we do still effectively, and what, how do we make ourselves relevant even in this new form? And so I think that's really what's important, is how do we adapt and change? And I think the team has done pretty well. I mean, there's some parts of their job that is very hard not being on site. I'm not going to disregard that, because it's very frustrating when they don't have access to their collection and they don't have access to their language holdings, and and you're stuck working from home and you have to do bits and pieces. But they have done really, really great work still moving ahead in this post-COVID life.
So my next question then is about how you do what you do. So besides a very clear passion and commitment to what you want to do, you require funding to do it. And with all that you do, I can only imagine that must have quite the cost. So can you tell us a little bit about how the Woodland Cultural Centre is funded?
Yeah, so like many not-for-profits, we're heavily dependent on public funding. So we receive a large majority of our operating dollars from Indigenous Services Canada. I would say it makes up about 68% of our funding. And then the remaining, say, 20% of the funding comes from other operating grants we receive through Ontario Arts Council, Canada Council for the Arts, and the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport through the Community Museum Operating Grant. So that sort of is the base of our operations. So, it changes year to year sometimes, depending on how well we do in our own self-generated revenues. So it roughly it can range anywhere from 70 to 87% of our funding is public funded. So we do rely heavily on those funds. And then the remaining about 20%, I would say, comes from our self-generated revenue, which we usually see in the form of tour revenue. So people booking tours with us, facility rentals. So a lot of people rent out our spaces, and also any other sales we do through our gift shop. So right now, you can imagine that my self-generated revenue is zero because we are not open, and we've done some very limited sales, but it's definitely way, way down than previous years at this time.
So besides, asking you here today to share everything that you've shared with us, and I mean, I felt like I knew a lot about the Woodland Cultural Center before we did this interview, but just from speaking to you, and I hope that the people at home who are watching this understand how important what you guys are doing. So besides inviting you here to share that story, the last thing that I ask every one of my guests is, how can we help? What is the best way the public can support your organization, whether it's as a volunteer or with a financial donation or with a share of a social media post, by attending your events? Where do we go to get more information? And what are some of the ways that people can have an impact to support the Woodland Cultural Center?
Well, the first thing I think, especially right now, is check out our website. We're always updating our website, woodlandculturalcenter.ca, daily, and also our social media. So we have a Facebook page, our Instagram, and Twitter, and you can find all the up-to-date information of what we're offering, whether it's, wanting to sign up for the virtual film screening on June 21st, or whether you want to help us in the Great Canadian Giving Challenge, which we're participating for the month of June for the Save the Evidence campaign. So for those of you who don't know what Save the Evidence is, it is the fundraising campaign that we are currently in to raise funds to finish off the restoration of the former Mohawk Institute residential school building. So for the month of June, every dollar raised enters us into a chance to win the prize of $20,000 through the Great Canadian Giving Challenge. So I've donated personally. I've been bugging all my friends and family to donate in the hopes that we'll be able to win this prize. But I think the biggest thing is just sharing what we're doing, participating in what we do. We want to connect with our community members and the public, and we still want people to want to learn more about Woodland and to want to participate in what we're doing. And so the best thing is, just keep us sort of handy in your social media and participate when you can. And if you can, definitely donate to Save the Evidence.
That's fantastic. So thank you. Thank you to your staff, your team, your volunteers, to the people who have donated, to obviously the organizations that are providing you with your funding to be able to do what you do. It's amazing, and it is a very important part of the history of this community. And thank you so much for coming here today and sharing all this with our viewers. And I hope you'll come back maybe at the end of the year with a bit of an update and some more information about what you've been doing.
Oh, we would love to, for sure. So, well, thank you, and I'm very happy to participate.
Excellent. Have a wonderful day.
You too.